So excited to have Bob Pockrass joining us now, longtime NASCAR reporter now with Fox Sports and one of the best in the business when it comes to providing analysis. Bob, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining me.
Great to be with you, Carolyn.
Let's start with Jimmie Johnson. You've covered him for a number of years, and now he's set to make his IndyCar debut. Interesting. What do you think fans can expect from him?
I think that they can expect a determined Jimmie Johnson. I think they will see a Jimmie Johnson who struggles early. His early tests have shown that it's going to take him a while to get used to going to IndyCar. It's a very different car, a much lighter car, a car that races totally different than what he's used to in NASCAR. But Jimmie's a guy who loves a challenge. I mean, if anybody knows the 7-time NASCAR Cup champion, he loves for people to say he can't do something or see something out there that people say, man, that'd be really hard to reach, and he reaches for it. So I expect Jimmie Johnson to struggle, and I expect him to get a whole lot better as the season progresses.
Yeah, Bob, you're reading my mind because I was thinking about, does this fit within the profile of something that Jimmie Johnson would like to do? And just from everything that I've been able to gather from the outside, whether it's, him always pushing himself physically or skiing in the back bowls of, who knows what mountain in the off season or sometimes during the season, it seems like he always wants to try that next thing. And maybe towards the end of his tenure with NASCAR, I don't want to say he was mentally burned out, but maybe just looking for that next carrot. I mean, does that sync up with what you know about him, that he needs to be stimulated mentally, I guess, in addition to all the physical stuff that he gets so much enjoyment out of?
Yeah, I think it was as much as, man, I really want to drive an IndyCar. And I want to drive it in a lot of races. And I've won 7 Cup titles. And if I have a chance to drive an IndyCar, I want to go do it. To him, he was like, I've done everything I've wanted in NASCAR, and now I have a chance to live my life on my own terms, to make my own schedule, and pretty much do every bucket list race item I've ever wanted to do. So why not go do it? Like he's like, I've got this awesome opportunity. And in addition, it's a great challenge for him. You're talking about a guy who, when he ran the Boston Marathon, set a time that he was going to be really tough for him to reach. So you ask, why did you set that time? He said, that's the only reason I can get out of bed at 5 a.m. to go train, is I need something like that to push me. And I think this checks all the boxes. It's fun, and it's going to push him big time.
Another interesting storyline, Bob, as it relates to upcoming Talladega. We'll get back to Richmond in a second, but Jennifer Jo Cobb making a Cup Series start at Talladega. What can you tell us for those who don't know a lot about her history, and this moment, which will be significant?
Yeah, so Jennifer Jo Cobb has been running in trucks for, I want to say about 10, 15 years, and she's been doing it pretty much on her own. She runs her own team on a very low budget, but she continues to race, and when she can, especially at the tracks such as Talladega, where maybe it doesn't come down to the greatest piece of equipment as far as motors and stuff like that, she's done okay. So she's going to make her first Cup start with Rick Ware Racing at Talladega, and I think it's going to be great for a lot of her fans. She is somebody who has continued to compete in NASCAR when a lot of people say, well, you're running 25th in a truck every week. Why keep doing it? She does it because she loves it, and she does it because she's able to put together a few sponsors and to be able to go race. And so why not continue to do it? And now she's got a little bit of sponsorship to be able to get in a Cup car, fulfill a dream, and we'll see what happens.
Will she inevitably be compared to Danica Patrick?
I don't think so. She doesn't have the racing history of a Danica Patrick, in the sense of Danica Patrick coming from IndyCar, where she had won a race, finished, top 5 a few times in the Indy 500. So there were a lot of expectations on Danica Patrick. Jennifer Jo Cobb, she's been running on a very small budget in the trucks, and her results have shown that.
Mm-hmm. As it relates to Richmond this weekend, I noticed that one of your fans on Twitter was asking, well, what about racing at Richmond at night? What kind of insight can you provide into the change there?
Yeah, so the spring Richmond race has kind of gone was night for a while, then went to day for a few years. Then the last few years it's been at night. And I think when you've seen races during the day, the track is slicker. There's less grip on the track because the temperatures are warmer during the day. So the tires don't work as well. And that tends to create better racing at Richmond because drivers have a little bit less control of their cars. Their cars may go from being good to being worse a little quicker than they would at night. So I think people are expecting for it to be a really good race. And, again, Fox has been pretty, has been out there quoted as saying that Sunday afternoon races, more people tend to watch than Saturday nights. So that's a factor. And then also a lot of short tracks, a lot of local tracks in local communities run Saturday nights. So there's no conflict with those. So a lot of things pointing, hey, let's try Sunday afternoon again. And they're doing so at Richmond this weekend.
Seems like it makes a lot of sense. It seems like it makes a lot of sense, especially Bob, if the track conditions are better and make for better racing. What do you see any carryover, if any, from Martinsville and some of the fighting that we saw? I mean, I know that tempers traditionally flare on a short track, but just curious about your assessment of everything that we saw at Martinsville and what you think we might see heading into this weekend.
Well, I think, especially the Cup guys, that they don't forget, right? They don't, they know who wronged them at Martinsville. And if they get wronged by those same people at Richmond, they're probably lose a little bit of patience. Richmond is a place, it's not as tight as Martinsville. You can get a little bit more separation between cars, but it's certainly a place where if you want to retaliate, you can go a little bit harder, a little bit deeper into the corner and either nudge somebody out of the way so that they keep racing or nudge them hard enough that they're not going to keep racing. And I think that's what it's kind of the wait and see what happens at Richmond, whether it's just kind of the typical bump and run or whether it's a wreck and run.
I know the thought of payback can be exciting for NASCAR fans heading into a weekend like this. Overall, do you think that fighting, causing intentional damage on the cars, all those kind of explosive storylines are ultimately good for the sport or bad for the sport?
It's a mix. I mean, I don't think that you can just have people wailing on each other every week, in fights. It's not, society doesn't really accept that. Right. So I don't think that's proper. I think that there are times where emotions do get the better of people. So you understand that it happens. I think that NASCAR is somewhat of a self-policing sport in the sense of, hey, if you wrong me, I'm going to wrong you on the track. If you take my spots away and take my purse money away from me, then I have, the right to take it away from you too. Certainly you don't want to escalate to the point where people get injured. But, I think that there is somewhat of an acceptable, if it's a similar situation, if you're fighting for position, if this person keeps cutting you off, that you can, race them a little bit more aggressively and turn them, and as long as they don't, get knocked out of the race or they don't, suffer too much damage, I think that's fairly acceptable.
One of the drivers I know you spoke with recently, Chase Elliott, maybe hasn't gotten off to the season start that he wanted. How concerned should Chase Elliott be about the lack of results that a lot of people expect from him?
Yeah, we talk about Chase Elliott and lack of results because he doesn't have a win this year after he won the last 2 races last year to win the championship. But it's only been 8 races. He's still like 7th in points. He's only 20 points off of where he was last year. So that's just a couple of spots a race. So nothing for him to be too concerned about. Certainly he hasn't had some of the best races in the first 8, but he has such a strong team. Hendrick Motorsports is strong. His crew chief, Alan Gustafson, is the guy who guided him to that title last year. And he has a lot of confidence that they can take what's probably been a good and very good car the first 8 races and turn it into a great car throughout the season.
At what point does it become a concern?
I think it becomes a concern in June or July because what happens is, they've had 8 races, but, one's been at Daytona, which is a kind of a separate type of track than, Daytona and Talladega are separate than the others. They've had one road course. They've had a couple of short tracks. They had a dirt race. There's not going to be another dirt race. So, and there's been a couple of races at 1.5-mile tracks. And I think you build on what you learn at all those types of tracks going into like kind of the next phase of the season. And so if you see improvement on things that you learned over the first 8 races over kind of like, let's say, the next 8 races, then you feel good. If you don't see that improvement, if you don't see yourself getting better and you see other teams getting better, that's when you start being concerned.
You mentioned the variety of tracks, the variety of races that we've seen. And we've also seen so far this season a lot of parity in terms of different winners, which I think is good for the sport, for fans and even the casual fan to be able to tune in and not, only have a bank of 4 or 5 drivers to choose from. That being said, are we heading into a stretch of the season now where you are going to start to see those well-equipped, faster teams, those big names that we recognize, start to take hold of the season, so to speak?
I think so, but the interesting thing about it is that some of those drivers haven't won yet. So, and you've had 7 winners in the first 8 races, and that includes a Michael McDowell from Front Row Motorsports, William Byron from Hendrick, who he had 1 win in his career at Daytona before this year. Christopher Bell from Joe Gibbs Racing won a road course race. A lot of people didn't have him penciled in to win that. So I think you're going to see drivers like Denny Hamlin, who doesn't have a win, Brad Keselowski, who doesn't have a win, Chase Elliott, who doesn't have a win. I would even think Kyle Busch, even though he hasn't had the greatest start, you wouldn't be surprised to see him win. So I think those drivers that you expect to see to have 2 or 3 wins in the regular season will start getting those wins here in the next month or 2.
I feel like, Bob, that everyone is always looking for the magic equation or the magic formula for, we need to take NASCAR into the next generation or figure out the next best thing. The stage racing certainly was an interesting added component when they put that in. But when you talk about parity, and I'm curious, somebody that's been covering the sport as long as you have, I mean, is that one of the keys to welcoming in more fans and to ensuring that the sport continues to grow and attract new people? Is some of these smaller teams, figuring out ways that they can contend with some of the more well-known drivers that we've known for so long?
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime if you're starting 36 to 40 cars, if you think that 25 different cars can win as opposed to 15, that's a good thing, right? Because fans of those drivers who maybe you thought didn't have a chance before are now thinking, man, I got a shot. Fantasy players, right? It makes it a little bit more fun for them, and that maybe the picks aren't so easy for them. So I think it adds a lot to it. I think it gives there are more teams, more organizations that have a shot at making the playoffs with NASCAR system of kind of win and you're in the playoffs. So it adds a ton to it. I don't think it's the entire piece to generating interest, but it certainly helps when you have more people winning. Now, that being said, it's also good if you have a driver who's out there winning 7, 8, or 9 races, because it's always good to have that, that team that everybody is striving for or trying to kind of knock off the top.
Because you opened the door to fantasy, do you have any advice for players this weekend heading into Richmond? Anybody you're keeping your eye on that you think could maybe potentially stir things up a little bit?
Well, I would say Martin Truex Jr., because he seems to win almost every, or finish top 3, finish top 3 in every short track race these days. But if you want somebody specific for Richmond, I'd look at Austin Dillon. He was top 5 last fall at Richmond, tends to run well there. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's a factor this weekend.
Bob, just before I let you go, kind of a 30,000-foot view question for you about 2020. Because as I've said a time or two, I've been reading you for a long time, and I know that you are one of the few who really kind of has a handle on what has happened in the evolution of the sport over the last, however many years. But 2020 was so unusual from an outsider's perspective looking in, from my perspective, because you had, NASCAR right in the middle of this intersection of politics and social justice and the pandemic. I mean, it was a lot. And the sport, like a lot of other sports, found itself just kind of right at the center of that conversation. So I wonder, how much you've processed what happened in 2020 and what you think the most significant lasting impact of such an unusual year will be on the sport.
Well, a couple of things. First off, NASCAR, in order to get back, they had to get back racing because the teams don't get paid. NASCAR doesn't get paid the TV money until they race. So NASCAR had to get all these races in, or else the teams were in danger of serious financial, that they were going to lose a ton of money. Then these are not billionaires really who own many of these teams. So they went to a system where they didn't practice and qualify. They just showed up and raced. And a lot of people didn't think they could do that, you've always had practice. You've always had qualifying. So it showed them that they can just show up and race so that they maybe don't need as much practice as they've given teams in the future. So on the track, I think it will have a lasting impact. Off the track, obviously, Bubba Wallace and his kind of taking the spotlight and taking a leadership role in combating racial injustice, was huge. And the NASCAR garage supporting him at Talladega, the NASCAR's kind of commitment to advocate for social change. It certainly was something that we hadn't seen before. The banning of the Confederate flag was a big step in just showing that the sport is welcome to all. Now the challenge will be, what is the impact of that? What more does NASCAR do? What other programs will NASCAR take on? And I think that question's still out. They've joined, they're working with a variety of groups, some that they were working with well before last year, but now I think there's a little bit more focus and there'll be a little bit more demand to say, hey, what are you doing? And I think, and I think that script is still to be written.
A lot of times we have a bad habit, I think, as a society of just, going through the news cycle and then forgetting about it. Have you felt any kind of tangible difference, or do you have that confidence in NASCAR and those decision makers that, this is something that's going to stick? And when you look back and you think about the history of diversity in the sport, this is going to be one of those key touchstone moments for a long time that will hopefully ultimately transform the sport for the better moving forward. And like you said, make it, more welcoming to new people.
I'd like to think so, but I don't think we'll know until their, fans are allowed fully back at the racetrack, till they are fully back in the infields, and what happens then. I just think that you've seen all the steps and you feel like it's been progress, but until you get to where there are 10,000 people camping in a campground at Darlington or at Talladega or at Daytona or at Texas, and kind of get a feeling of the atmosphere there, and is it more welcoming? And I'm not just trying to single out those tracks, but just using them as examples of tracks with some big infields. I think that's where you'll really start to be able to tell if NASCAR is able to make a difference.
Internally, where you are kind of working day in and day out, the drivers that I've met and spoke with in the last couple of years in my time covering the sport, for the most part, I think are very much in line with the times in terms of really trying to be welcoming. And I remember, Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s comments really resonating with me, setting the tone that this kind of behavior won't be accepted. And you did have isolated, racial incidents that NASCAR really threw down the hammer on swiftly. But, fans aside, because I think you're right. I think when they come back, that's really going to show whether or not there's been significant change. When you walk around, the garages and you talk to drivers, I mean, for the most part, do you gather that this is a young group of drivers and a group of stars that are fully in line with supporting diversity and want that change for the sport?
I think so. I think it is, it's certainly a lot of the young drivers are so used to racing in kind of a diverse race fields, right? They're used to racing against Black drivers. They're used to racing against women drivers. And so for many of them, there's not a lot of question, right? They're like, of course they're accepting. I think the challenge is educating people and educating I guess, educating drivers who maybe don't have, who don't know the history, right? They know their history of being able to race in diverse fields, and they don't know the history of it not being diverse and why it wasn't diverse. And so the challenge is to educate them to show why it is important, why it is talked about. And I think everyone is starting to understand maybe a little bit better of the history to know that, okay, this is something that I need to get behind.
Great insight from Bob Pockrass of Fox Sports. Bob, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.